You're watching or listening to Strangers in Space, and for the next 60 minutes, we're going to be talking about the legend of Ruby Sutek, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
Hi, I'm John.
Hi, I'm Matt.
That went well, didn't it?
There's two things. John's obviously delayed, but you said Sutek?
Yes.
Okay.
Did you not notice I put that in the name of the chat that we're in as well?
Yeah, but not Sutek. It's Sutek.
Well, I was just trying to do an accent thing to make it sound a little bit more like Sunday.
Oh, okay, fine. Just checking this isn't another Sipperman or Corrie.
Oh no,
Cora
it's not.
thing.
It's not a Simon thing. It's not a Simon thing. Well, okay, let's go round. All right, no, let's ask ourselves whether we enjoyed it in a minute. I mean, Sutek, after, what is it, 49 years, isn't it?
75, yeah.
Is it the right thing to do? Because
Yeah.
this was, I mean, well, I was just going to say, because I spent the last sort of 2 minutes of the episode laughing at the audacity of it, even though the rumours about Sutek had exploded in the last couple of days. But my biggest thought as the end credits rolled was, well, can you do that? I mean, clearly you can. Should you do that? So go on, John. Should you do that, I suppose, is the question.
Yes, because I think as fans, we get far too hung up on the continuity of it. I don't think you need that much context to go, this is a big bad guy. He set up, it's set up in the lead up to it. All the gods, I said, this is the ultimate god, the god of death. So hang on, this is a big bad guy. That's all you need to know. You don't need to know about pyramids of Mars. You don't need knowledge. It's to be watched on one level by fans, on another by the more casual viewer.
This is going to be great for the viewers. Listeners will probably be okay, but John's in a different room, so his internet is completely broken in him up. So you've frozen on the screen, and we can barely hear a word you're saying, which is even worse than last week, John. But I think we got the gist of what you were saying. So I'll go to Matt now, in the hope that.
So for me, the return of Sutek has less of an impact as the return of Gabriel Wolf, because I think Gabriel Wolf's voice has cachet from two different generations of Doctor Who, and I think if it wasn't down to his voice, then I would be feeling a little bit. So the problem is there's an intellectual approach to this and there's an emotional approach to this. Emotionally, Pyramids of Mars is my favourite ever story. I think it's my favourite ever Doctor Who story.
Top 5 for me, so yeah.
So him coming back works emotionally for me. Intellectually, I don't really care. I mean, it's like I saw a tweet from one of the ladies who work in the prosthetics or the VFX department in Doctor Who was able to share a story. Now it's been revealed that she went to her boss, who's a massive Tom Baker fan, and just said, "So, who the F is Sutek?" and that kind of works both ways. It doesn't matter that it's Sutek really if you're completely new to Doctor Who, because I think, it's the way it's sold as a big momentous. It's all about Shooty Gatwa's face, and it's all about Gabriel Wolf's voice, and it's all about the CGI that they use and what they do to Susan Triad. I think those are the important things. So yeah, fine.
Well, like anything, it's like if Sutek worked the first time around, there's no reason Sutek should not work this time around, because let's face it, you don't need any knowledge of the first time for the second time to have the impact that the first time had, as long as you do it right. So I've got a couple of caveats about whether it works. I think it basically does. I've got a couple of small caveats. One is the whole point of Pyramids of Mars is the sort of Egyptian iconography. So without the mummies, is the fact that it's Sutek instead of Satan somewhat lessened? And then I suppose the other caveat is that Sutek is not a god. He's an Osarian. He's an alien rather than a god. So I think Russell T Davies has played a massive sleight of hand in saying, oh, we're working our way up this step ladder of the gods till we get to the one at the top, who's actually just an alien. So I think that's a big cheat in some ways. John, what do you think?
It's kind of Is it just a terminology change? Is the thing? Is it just what is, apart from the naming of it in science fiction versus more fancy terms, what's the difference between a god and a hugely powerful alien? They're both just essentially made up powerful figures. So I did say that last week obviously, as well.
But I think
that's quite.
I think the point of gods is that gods sort of beget man, and so man is of a different order of species than gods, whereas with aliens they are the same order of species but just different by virtue of sort of geographical remove. So the whole point of the first Sutek, Pyramids of Mars, was that Sutek wasn't a god, but that more primitive men than us thought he was a god and worshipped him as such because they didn't understand he was just different. So I think there's a difference between being somebody who's worshipped as a god and somebody who actually is a god. And of course, the whole point of a god is God begets man. So the Greek gods are the gods that beget the Greeks, the Roman gods are the gods that beget the Romans, the Christian gods are the gods that beget the Christians, and so on and so forth. And so, yeah, it's a sort of a terminology thing, but it's also, I think there's also a comprehension thing. I'm not entirely sure Russell T Davies comprehends. I mean, cards on the table, it was great fun though, wasn't it? And it's good to have the old bugger back.
I know that Dylan of this podcast has actually watched it twice in a row.
Really? And he's not been enjoying this run. I don't know how much it'll stand up to a second go.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do the did you enjoy it? Cards on the table. I mean, it's basically just one scene in one location for 45 minutes, or it splits between two locations. I don't think it'll stand up to. It's a bit like Russell T Davies said. Do you remember that last 10 minutes of Utopia? Do you remember how exciting that was? I wonder if I can spin that for 45. And the answer is no, Russell. It doesn't really work at 4.5 times the length. But it still basically works. So I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the experience of watching it the first time. Don't know if I will the second. Matt.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. But again, emotionally, I enjoyed it. And I was feeling like excited towards the end, and I was intrigued. But it basically has no story. So it's got no scaffolding. It's just revelation, exposition all the way through, which kind of Stephen Moffat did, but he tended to hang it on a story. This is kind of an isolated episode, but that's intellectually that Russell T Davies absolutely gets away with it in a way that I don't think Chibnall quite got away with the Timeless Children explanation. I think this was more excitingly told, and I found it funny because Russell T Davies sort of playfully reveals the anagram of S triad, which is an obvious anagram, and then lampshades it with everybody saying it's an obvious anagram. Yeah. And then he rather pompously then points out that Sutek is not an anagram, but a sort of a homophone, whatever. Yeah. And says, well, but nobody spotted this. And I'm kind of thinking, well,
we've been talking about it for the last 2 days.
Talking about that earlier. We've been talking about it, and it's been all over the internet. A bit like Susan Twist appearing in every episode. A lot of the sort of the interviews are saying, "I bet you didn't notice that Susan Twist has been in every episode," and we sort of noticed it from Church and Ruby Road that it was the same actress in a part, and that was going to have some sort of significance. So I think, for non-us viewers, a lot of these things, are a massive surprise. But
go on. I was just going to say,
as I said, Gabriel Wolfe. It's Gabriel Wolfe's voice as soon as that comes through, and even Gabriel Wolfe doing dialogue, repeating dialogue that he didn't say in Pyramids of Mars. It was Bernard Archer's in Pyramids of Mars, but it kind of works anyway. So I'm listening to it thinking, yes, he did say it, and I'm rewatching episode 2 of Pyramids of Mars and going, oh, actually, the servant of Sutek says, I am the servant of Sutek, and that's Bernard Archer's, and then
Oh, it's not even Bernard Archer. Is it Bernard Archer?
I think it is Bernard Archer's voice.
Because I was thinking it was the other fella, the sort of servant fella.
Ibrahim.
Ibrahim. Is it not Ibrahim who says it?
No,
first,
so
No.
Ibrahim's the servant of Sutek.
right,
But
right, right.
the black
That's
masked
right.
figure.
Bernard Archer
Yeah.
kills it.
Comes
and
in at
says
the end,
line.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah, of course.
But that's fine. As I say, watching it intellectually, I think Russell T Davies, as you say, is pulling a lot of sleight of hands. I don't care about the gods thing. John just managed to convince me that we're in a post Von Daniken world where Von Daniken world was gods are just super powerful aliens. Now we're in the stage where super powerful aliens are just gods. And godlike, if you want to say godlike, it's a sort of a synonym anyway. I think it's a bit of pedantry that they're not technically gods. Well, they are really.
Oh, yeah, it's just a stepladder approach that Russell T Davies took to getting us there. Kind of, I don't think works, but I don't think it matters. I don't think it works, and I think you spot it not working as the episode unfolds. But I don't think you care.
And the one more thing, the other thing I really enjoyed were the set piece. I really enjoyed the look of that
the VHS thing, yeah.
time window. That VHS, that was creepy.
Yeah, let's get back into that because I want to find out whether John enjoyed it first, and then we can sort of dig into the bits of it. I don't know if this episode will go.
Let's just talk. Let's just talk. John can come in at the end and just give a score.
Because I mean, I don't know because I mean it's one of those episodes, but there really is not an awful lot going on, and I can imagine that people. I mean, Dylan clearly watched that and thought great, but I can imagine people watched that and thought, what? So, John, did you like it? Did you enjoy it?
Oh, totally. It's my theory on Russell T Davies' finales. He writes them around cliffhangers, so it's always going to be that crescendo in the middle. That's going to be the bit, and that might be why people have a kind of a problem with the endings of it because they're not quite so important as just that mode of excitement. It's Doctor Who's just on streaming essentially, and streaming is trying to find the property that will get you revenue for years and years. It's cash cow, can have this long tail, and Russell T Davies is kind of writing it for the moment. All that matters is just that kind of that rising tension towards a moment, and essentially all it is just putting Doctor and back him into a corner and keep it back and make the corner smaller and smaller until everything closes in. I did have a kind of issue with the way the story just kind of becomes the unit for help, and the way it just switches swiftly from there's this mysterious Susan Twist woman to here's this other mysterious woman.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's a point.
That was a bit kind of jam.
Yeah. Yeah, because Mrs. Flood has been sort of left in limbo. She gets basically one scene, and then we'll come back to this because I guess we'll spend probably more of this podcast talking about what we think might happen next week than what we've actually enjoyed about this week, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, but visually it's beautifully done. That whole set that Matt was going about, the time window one, the Ruby Road holograph stuff, gorgeous. Yeah, it's a beautiful episode. It might just be vibes, all vibes to get to the cliffhanger, but it works on the emotion of it, and that worked for me. Frankly, I've sat next to Eddie, and Eddie loves Pyramids of Mars. He watched it last week, and he just almost went through the ceiling.
Right. Great. Yeah. I see. I've not watched Pyramids of Mars with mine yet, so I don't know what he'll make of this. But I should imagine actually doing it the other way around, watching this, and will make him want to go back and watch Pyramids of Mars.
I mean, I'm assuming not we will a normal like viewer will enjoy this because it is just a sequence of it's a roller coaster of set pieces that are creepy. That Ruby Road time window sequence is really frightening, really sinister in a kind of Weeping Angel type way. The hooded cloak and the sudden jump and things like that.
It's taking Doctor Who save settings, the TARDIS and unit age, and it's invading, and that's always unsettling.
The bit where the thing appears in the middle of that set too is a fantastic moment in the story, and because it's in color and you can see the red, you can't quite work out whether it's real or whether it's part of the sort of the sort of hologram type thing. That's a brilliant moment, and that's a really creepy moment. You're right, the whole hologram thing, I thought that was great. it's this whole series has been a really weird experience in terms of we've got all this extra money apparently, so the budgets have got to be. I mean, I don't know quite exactly what the budgets are, but I guess the best guess that people make is that it's more than double what it has been for episodes before. And we've had episodes like last week, for instance. I don't think Rogue sort of on a superficial level looks any more expensive than, say, something like Girl in the Fireplace, until you actually sort of, it even goes back to the intellectually versus emotionally. When you intellectually pick it apart, you think, Christ, there's a lot of extras here, and they're in a lot of the story. And we've got choreographers in, and we've got people working on the music to rescore like pop songs and stuff. A lot of this cost a lot of money. But actually what's on screen is not so very different from Girl in the Fireplace. And I think that's basically been true every week. And the thing about this episode is it's basically 3 sets. There's the stage, essentially, where you've got Susan Triad doing a speech. You've got the time window set, and you've got the unit HQ. So basically there's a story that's not so very different from something out of season 5 with Patrick Troughton. And I don't know if people necessarily, the sort of more casual viewers, will notice quite how expensive that whole time window sequence must have been. But I think when you buy into it, it's a fantastic bit. And I think that's where the money went, in letting you buy into it, right?
I think that
That's it.
the way it's done now is there's a weird, because this is what the Star Wars series are doing in America. It's kind of going back in time to when Doctor Who was just made in the studio, because they have the volume and they have more technology. They have larger studios for Doctor Who. They're making much more in-house, which means ironically they can retain secrets, even though, you know, we sort of unlocked lots of the secrets anyway. But it does feel like it's gone back in time, and I think it's sort of brought in house. So I would imagine those big spaces we see, the unit lab room in the past would have been done in the Millennium Stadium or somewhere big, or a factory somewhere,
Yeah.
and that would have felt exactly.
Some of it was done by the
same.
Millennium Stadium.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But that's why I find it interesting, because it is like going back to season 1 of the classic series, except instead of Lime Grove, you've now got, you know, huge warehouse sized sets.
You know what? I was actually watching it. I finished and went, GL's going to be talking about rooms tomorrow.
I mean, it's the
gig. Yeah, that's what
it is the giggle again, though, isn't it? It is basically just split between the 3 locations, just like the giggle was. But then, like the giggle, I think that Russell T Davies is one of those writers and one of those producers as well, because it's not always the episodes he writes. So, for instance, for me, Boom really worked despite the 1 location, basically, because of, I don't know, it just had an energy and a momentum. For me, I didn't think Rogue had the energy and the momentum, so that didn't work. And that's essentially just 1 location, just like Boom was. This is 2 locations, 3 if you count the fact that you've got a room upstairs and a room downstairs, but essentially it's 3 locations, and the giggle was too. But I think if you get the energy and the momentum, and I don't think this had the energy, but I think what it had was the momentum, didn't it? So you come in at the start of this episode, and basically that very first conversation between the Doctor, very first conversation, you have to say hello to everybody first in order. That was one of that just felt clunky and clumsy, and I thought, God, it's not going to be all like this, is it? And fortunately, it got on with it pretty quickly. But basically, the first conversation after that is a promise to the audience watching that by the end of this episode, you'll have found out what this thing means, and what this thing means, and what this thing means, basically. And so the Doctor is making a promise to the audience that you're going to find these things out. And so, because that promise is made at the start, because most episodes don't make a promise like that at the start. There'll be a promise of there'll be a monster or there'll be a villain, but there's not a promise of the unveiling of a variety of mysteries that have been ongoing for several weeks. So it makes that promise, and that's the thing that hooks you in. And then it's a case of, can the writer A, keep the plates spinning, but B, do it in a fashion that feels natural to the characters so that you still care about the characters. There was a bit in the middle of this that kind of lost me a bit, where everybody was like really emoting a lot, and I just thought, oh my god, this is really syrupy and I'm really not feeling it. But fortunately it got past that and moved on. But basically I thought he spanned the plates. So there are things like Mrs. Flood where he just didn't bother. He just said, right, this is a thing, we'll have it next week instead. So Mrs. Flood and sort of Ruby's grandmother, we don't know what's going to happen there, but clearly that's going to be sort of sorted out next week, and we're not going to see anything more of it till then. You know, we didn't get to see anything more of it till then. But I thought he spanned the plates well enough, and he kept the sort of character beats. The Doctor, for instance, Ncuti Gatwa, I thought was brilliant, absolutely brilliant this week. I think it was his best episode. So, yeah, what do you think? What do you think of the plate spinning, or what do you think of the Doctor, or what do you think of whatever? John, while you're still clear and you've not broken up again yet. It's coming.
Ncuti was, yeah, Ncuti was.
No, John, you're terrible broken up. Right, John.
Ncuti was, because there was he's that scene where he's.
John, it's not happening.
Sorry. Yes.
Leave the call, leave your Audacity running, and just bring yourself back into the call, and we'll see if that sorts it out, because it's not very good at all.
Give me 2 minutes here. I'll see if I can shift the internet.
Okay. Matt, what did you think?
So I liked Ncuti Gatwa, but I was thinking before this episode, and I still had that feeling, I don't really like his Doctor very much, because what his Doctor doesn't have, which other Doctors had, is this sort of humorous, kind of slightly goofy when things go wrong. He's too kind of
overconfident.
Insouciant. Yeah, but it's an overconfidence that hasn't really paid. It's paid off in terms of anger. So the overconfidence did pay off this week, but it's not humorous. It's not balanced by this sort of humorous overconfidence. The other Doctors, they start a sentence and it runs away with them, or there's a sort of an alienness where they don't quite know how to converse. And this Doctor doesn't seem to have that.
Lacks a bit of a self-awareness in some ways.
Yeah. So I sort of missed that, and for me, I think I've decided that that's a kind of a fundamental part of a Doctor. Although actually Sylvester McCoy didn't have that necessarily. So
he had he had the going off at tangents thing instead, which is different but similar.
I think maybe I'm thinking modern Doctors. Every modern Doctor has had this kind of. Even Jodie Whittaker has a sort of, I'm very uncomfortable with this conversation, I'm just going to back out, which people criticised, but I quite liked, because that was a sort of doctorish moment where, non sequiturs and sort of emotional inconsistency. I don't think this Doctor's got the lightness yet. The sort of, he's all sort of joy and enthusiasm, but there's no geekiness to him.
I think it feels like, so the thing that I think it feels like is missing sometimes, because I think it was there in Boom, and I think it was there this week, but I think it's been missing in most of the other episodes, is a kind of sense of substance. So I think he feels like a properly substantial presence, but also it feels like, despite that presence being substantial, the actual sort of quality of that presence is a lot of veneer. So there's a lot of, big smiles, big grins, big hugs, big emotions, big cries. But actually, it's not felt in a lot of these episodes like all those moments have come together in a rounded character. It feels a lot like veneer, but I think in Boom and this week, you've had the substance as well.
I mean, I think I agree. But I think all the Doctors have this kind of veneer of confidence and seriousness. But underneath most of them is basically a ridiculous idiot.
Mm-hmm.
But a very, very smart idiot. And I don't get the feeling underneath this Doctor that there's an idiot. I get the feeling that I don't know what's underneath this Doctor yet, because Russell T Davies hasn't shown us through the cracks yet. I think
he's not shown us anything about Ruby Sunday either.
No.
So she still feels like a really two-dimensional character who's been fleshed out by the actor.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't, even after 73 yards, I still don't feel like I know who that character is really at all, apart from Millie Gibson's, sort of portrayal of her, performance of her.
It feels a bit like Russell T Davies is trying to correct things that he got right in the past. So in the past series, he didn't go very deeply into Doctor Who lore, and he'd had mysteries, but he wasn't sort of obsessed with like interlocking mysteries. Then Stephen Moffat happens, and he sees the Doctor Who lore and the mysteries sort of interconnecting, and how successful that can be. And so Russell T Davies is has introduced Doctor Who lore and mysteries into his story, but he's kind of forgotten to put the character in. It's got good dialogue, but it's the character.
I feel there was something he said in an interview. I think it was before the series started. It might be since, where he said something about the fact that there are things that he did or does as a writer and that other writers do that he's been trying not to do this time to try and make it different. And I got the impression that the thing he was talking about was some of the substance things, some of the bread and butter things. And one of the bread and butter things is maybe like telling us what Millie Gibson's character does for a living or something, how she fills her time before the Doctor turns up. You get to see her in a band that plays in the evenings, but that can't be the whole of her life. We never really get an impression of what the whole of her life is. And I think that's rubbed off into the Doctor as well. And I think the two actors are great actors, and I think they really clearly, obviously enjoy each other's company. But I still don't think there's any chemistry between the characters, because I don't really think we know who either of the characters are.
But in a way, that's a theme in this season, that it's packed with characters much like the lady in 73 Yards, that you don't know really what they're thinking or doing. And kind of that sort of works with Ruby Sunday, because she is a mystery. So she's got this kind of, there isn't a character, even the TARDIS, in a sense, there's nothing in this season that couldn't turn out to be evil or a villain or malevolent or something that isn't what they say it is. So I think in constructing this, he's got this kind of omni mystery going on where everything is unreliable, but that means you lose the kind of the central core stability of the TARDIS team, the Doctor and companion. But you gain, this mystery of Ruby Sunday, and that will pay off if it turns out that Ruby Sunday, is just a kind of fictional construction, or there's no sort of substance to her on purpose.
Yeah. So Dylan, like way back at looks like John might be about to join us.
Right.
John, hopefully it's a bit better this time.
I am the servant of Welsh broadband.
I bring its gift of disconnection to all humanity.
Oh, you sound much better now. You look and sound much better. And I've just jinxed it, haven't I? I've just jinxed monsooned it.
Hey.
We were talking about the fact that the main characters haven't felt substantial, and wondering whether that's a deliberate thing as part of the story, because it feels like an awful lot of this series hasn't felt like it's got a massive amount of substance to it. In terms of, like, Russell T Davies is usually really good at sketching in backgrounds and things, but it almost feels like he's deliberately avoided it this time. But to save going over the whole conversation again, I'll kind of move it on. And I think there's things to talk about what might happen next week and where this might all be going, and whether all of it's going to get resolved or whether there's things still to come. I mean, it looks basic. We've got the one who waits now, right? So it looks basically like, with Mrs. Flood and Susan Triad and everything, it looks basically like almost everything is going to get resolved next week. So Russell T Davies' promise that he was going to solve it all looks like an actual genuine promise. But what I was going to say is, Dylan brought this up right back, I think, after the first week when we'd had the first 2 episodes and there were those winks and nods to camera and stuff. And the question was, is Russell T Davies doing this deliberately as part of a story? Matt's thing was, well, I think it's just part of the fun. But I think if you're doing those things in a program like this, in stories that are like these stories are, you have to have it as part of the fiction somehow in order for the series to have that substance. So I don't know, John, going back to what Dylan, I mean, just that kind of, because we've not had the winks to camera and stuff after those first 2 episodes, have we? That whole fourth wall breaking was just entirely in those first 2 episodes.
It's a deliberate choice, isn't it? Because there's no way that Russell doesn't do that absolutely 100% deliberately. But
there has to be a reason why if you're doing it deliberately, doesn't there?
But those winks are kind of, they're God's more playfulness. So is that part of the energy of those episodes? You know, because particularly in the first couple episodes, we know the aftermath of what the Toymaker did is still there. So, you know, it's like the universe where Shooty can get a hammer out the TARDIS and just bang it, and there's the TARDIS. It's cartoon logic. So those first 4 episodes do go on cartoon logic, but Boom did seem to be a switch.
Yeah, and since then we've not had much more of the same, have we? It's felt like a story of 2 halves, hasn't it? Then.
Yes, absolutely. So
in my defense, sorry,
I wasn't like an accusation, but it was like I think
from memory, what I thought at the time was the winks to camera, the Mrs. Flood bits, I thought were going to come back. I didn't think the Mavity bit, I thought that was a joke. But as it happens, I think the Mavity bit's tied into a Susan Triad bit, and it's the Susan Triad bit that comes back rather than the Mavity bit being a point.
Well, the Mavity is the symptom rather than the cause. Isn't it?
Yeah.
I think so. I think it's the Mrs. Flood is the big mystery now, and whether she's obviously, I don't think she's a harbinger, because otherwise you get like 3 harbingers in one episode, and that's overdoing it a bit.
Yeah.
Whether she's a kind of a White Guardian style god of life, maybe she turns out not to be a villain, but turns out to be a protector, because she's been sort of hanging around Ruby Sunday all of her life, looking after, or in the flat next door.
Why shouldn't she be Susan? Say that would be my kind of theory on that.
I saw the Susan bit now as just a big trolling kind of. Russell T Davies knows that everybody expects Susan the Rani or something to come back, so he spends half the episode sort of anticipates Susan.
But I think he's used that rather than, I don't think he's just trolling with it. I think he's used it. I think he's noticed that it's a thing and said, well, what if we use that thing? So he's made it part of the story, hasn't he? And that's what I thought that was really effective, actually. I don't expect to see Susan. I mean, it's possible, and I think it would be nice. I don't expect to see her, though. I imagine. So we've got to try and make sense of, how and where has Sutek come from? And so the sense I was, go on.
So yeah, I saw a question on Twitter for this, and I thought the answer is obvious. So at the end of Pyramids of Mars, Sutek sent it into the far future, basically in the direction that Wild Blue Yonder's setting.
Yeah.
So in Wild Blue Yonder, Sutek basically comes back in because obviously the TARDIS is, he knows about the TARDIS and he uses the TARDIS, possesses the TARDIS, and uses it to get back to.
TARDIS has basically carried him back to here.
So So it's quite
like
nice
Captain Jack in Utopia.
Yeah, but kind of the Wild Blue Yonder, the whole Donna with the coffee was a misdirection. Then is what we're saying.
Or part of it. Maybe that's. Maybe that's so. Maybe. I mean, you can. These things probably don't get explained, and they probably don't need being explained. But for example, Sutek infuses the TARDIS, but it's kind of stuck in the fabric of the TARDIS, and Donna spills the coffee on the TARDIS, and something explodes, and that's what frees Sutek, or something like that. You can explain things like that, right? I don't think that's necessarily the important thing. The impression I was getting, without really thinking about it, because again, like I have done on previous weeks, I've literally come straight from watching the episode to being here, is that Sutek had maybe somehow been in the TARDIS the whole time since Pyramids of Mars, kind of trapped or else waiting. I don't suppose it really matters which.
But there is the sequence of Pyramids where you see this face go through the TARDIS, and that's not really explained in the episode.
And of course, the whole thing at the end is the Doctor traps Sutek in a kind of time loop using
It's
bits
a
and
time
pieces
travel.
that
He throws him to, as Matt says, to other far future. He ages him to death. Is the theory?
But using technology that he's pulled out of the TARDIS. And so what I'm wondering is if that far future is in that technology that therefore goes back into the TARDIS, and Sutek's been waiting there ever since. I don't think it really matters, but I think it's nice to talk about these things because basically that's what a podcast is for, right? To talk through the crap.
But I think the Susan Foreman thing is a red herring. I don't expect to see. I liked it, but I think it was, and it enabled Russell T Davies to again rather pompously explain how, well, Susan hasn't been seen in the series since the 20th anniversary, so it was high time to bring her back and cue a clip from An Unearthly Child, which, you know, naughty RTD, and it's a way of directing the viewer's attention away from anything other than Pyramids of Mars. So it's saying, you know, first season Heartland, that's where you should be looking at. Don't look at the Tom Baker stuff. Oh, Sean Pertwee's built for this episode. Don't look at the Tom Baker stuff. Look at the Third Doctor. Maybe it's the demons. I've just got a feeling there's lots of sort of quite smart, conscious misdirection going on that might turn out to be something, but it's, you know.
Well, yeah, of course,
it was that 5 stories he recommended, wasn't it? And none of them were Pyramids of Mars.
No.
And there was the other thing where they said in one of the previews that a piece of technology that's been around, or a piece of something that's been around since the Jon Pertwee era, and of course it's the time window, which wasn't, I mean, there was no story with a time. Am I misremembering? There was nothing about a time window in a unit story, was there?
No, it's just that you forbade us to do that, so we haven't done it. Where is it? 10 stories down. That's it.
But there's no time window mentioned in anything like the Time Monster or anything, is there? I'm trying to think
Tom
now.
Tit. It's not. It's Tom Tit, or the technology in Day of Dark is in the future. It's not even.
In other words, but what I'm saying is, because I couldn't work out whether it's something that's mentioned in a Pertwee story that he said, oh, there's a mention of this thing, why don't we actually make this thing a thing? Or whether he's just saying, well, this thing was never mentioned at the time, but we're dating it back to then. And it's the latter, isn't it? They've created this thing for this story and they've dated it back to Pertwee's time.
Unless, covering myself, Sean Pertwee turns up next episode and actually stuff from the Pertwee years is somehow used to solve the problem.
Well, not impossible. I mean, it depends how far Russell T Davies goes in the sense of using the stuff that's in the story to solve the story. Because, so I think this was always a criticism of RTD first time around, that his endings were Deus Ex Machinas or Chekhov's guns, which basically is Chekhov's gun is a Deus Ex Machina that you actually point to before you use it. So it makes no difference. Neither of those things are things that are inherent to the story, but they're basically things that come from outside to solve the story. God's hand on the machine. But the one that I like from that first RTD period is the third one, the one with the Master, the last of the Time Lords, because the thing that they use to solve the problem of the Master is the technology that the Master used to become the problem in the first place. So the Master becomes Prime Minister by hypnotizing the entire planet, and it's that technology that hypnotizes people that Martha then uses to free the Doctor and get rid of the Master. So actually there, you're actually using the building blocks of the story to solve the story. Here, I wonder then, so are they going to use the time window to get rid of Sutek? Because that would be a nice way of doing it. I hope RTD is thoroughgoing enough to actually use the time window rather than just we get to next week and it's forgotten all about.
I mean, it's a big set, so you assume that they would use again. Also, we don't know what triad technology really is because she never quite got round to introducing
this is it.
We know it's important and we know it's all pervasive. And again, what Russell T Davies has done is potentially a lot of red herrings based on he repeats himself quite a lot in this series. And I'm beginning to wonder whether he knows that he's repeating himself, and sometimes he repeats himself with something like triad technology. That's, the number of times a villain has introduced a piece of technology to the entire world for free in Doctor Who, not just Russell T Davies, but across all the years.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the red herring again. Maybe it's not. Maybe.
Well, he does lampshade that, doesn't he?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So, just on the point of next week, it's called Empire of Death, which now, given the Sutekh thing, is kind of feels like a reference to paraphrasing dialogue from Pyramids of Mars, right? About Sutekh's. I don't know if he actually says Sutekh's Empire of Death, but certainly that's kind of
gift of death, isn't it? More than anything else.
No, that's that specific one. But later in the story, he talks about the. I can't remember exactly how he phrases it, but kind of later in the story, especially, I think it's in that scene where he meets the Doctor and puts him down on his knees, where he talks about the Empire of Death he's going to bring. But he doesn't. I don't think Empire of Death is the expression he uses. But the point I'm making is Empire of Death feels very Sutekh, feels like the kind of thing that. So it makes a bit more sense than just the name by itself. It's still a bit wishy-washy, if you ask me. But I'm wondering if he'll do the same thing he did in Last of the Time Lords and start next week's episode with the 6 months later. I don't know if he can, because we're sort of on the precipice of certain things happening here. But also, I feel that if he doesn't do a 6 months later, and like literally Sutekh appears above the TARDIS, and the next episode takes place in real time, and 45 minutes later he's gone, doesn't that make it feel like a really superficial threat if he's this big a threat?
So having watched Doctor Who Unleashed, where it has a clip from the upcoming episode,
that's
not the clip I saw took place almost immediately after the big unconvincing CGI Sutekh appears.
Oh, I loved it though. I thought it was great.
And I can say from the filming that I've seen that was behind my work, no, and it's footage actor, so it's Bonnie and Shooty on the message. So,
of course, yeah.
One side thing that I was quite relieved about when I heard Gabriel Wolf's voice, because I was quite firm when we had the conversation about what gods could return and what could happen, and JR mentioned basically the devil from the Impossible Planet coming back, and I was quite firm that actually I didn't think that was a thing to return. I thought that was just an energy and a thing. For a moment during this episode, I was kind of trying to prepare what I said on the podcast as eating my hat that he had returned. But so actually, when Sutekh was revealed, I was partially very, very much relieved that I didn't have to do that. That it was the other Gabriel Wolf thing. But that episode, that's why I'm excited because of Gabriel, because I think Gabriel Wolf inspires Russell T Davies to write these sort of Robert Holmes Baroque kind of lines that are genuinely sinister. I think his voice, coupled with that dialogue, is sinister in a different way from John Sim, for instance. And I'm kind of quite excited. I think that kind of raises the level of tension, that kind of supernatural sort of god. I think that works really well, because the Impossible Planet, the Satan Pit, was really creepy. I mean, it's kind of notoriously sinister.
I can imagine this entire series exists because Russell T Davies was watching Pyramids of Mars and thought, that would have sounded so much better if Gabriel Wolf had said it. What if I get Gabriel Wolf to say it? I wonder.
And he's not wrong.
No, he's not wrong. Oh, no, absolutely. I wonder if he will use the next episode to conflate his version of Satan with Sutekh in some way, because it did. Well, did it not feel like that's where it was going when you saw that red thing above the TARDIS? That reminded me of some of the special effects from the Satan Pit. And they even talk about one of the characters being in hell. So it felt to me like
Ruby's mum calls it the Beast.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
yes, I wouldn't be surprised if Russell T Davies did try to cover himself by just saying, "Oh, I've encountered an avatar of Sutekh in the far future." But the level of dialogue that revelation would have to encompass, and it would have to come from someone, and it would have to be employed him talking to someone else who wasn't there, I'm just
Oh,
not
no, I
sure
don't
how
think
he would
you'd-
do it.
Oh,
Yeah,
I don't
where
think
would
you
the
do it by.
resonance be?
I don't think you do it by explaining it. I think you just do it a sort of show and tell thing. I think you just make it clear that this character's the same character in ways other than saying that it's the same character.
Possibly.
I mean, he's 3/4 of the way there already, isn't he? They've talked about the pit. They've talked about hell. They've talked about the beast. They've got Gabriel Wolf doing the voice. They've even done a visual that reminds you of the Satan pit. It's 3/4 of the way all there already. All he has to do is just push it over the line, I think. So, all right, should we talk about what we do expect then? Because we've been talking for 50 minutes or something, 45 minutes or so. There's a lot of things still to clear up. So should we just so we still don't know who Ruby Sunday's mother is. This was one of those weird sort of 3 cliffhangers in one things that Russell T Davies likes to do, wasn't it? One of them is, in fact, 4 if you count the Mrs. Flood thing, although that was about 20 minutes earlier. One of the things is Ruby's still waiting for that character to turn around so we can see the face of her mother in the sort of hologram thing. Do we expect to find out who Ruby Sunday's mother is? Or is that going to be... Do you think so, 100%?
I would never go 100% with Russell T Davies, but it's an answer that you've been promised in this episode. The whole premise of it revolves around we're going to find out who her mother is, or we're going to look to find out. So there has to be something there. And she's someone who can see, Sutek around the TARDIS. So there's something there. There's something relevant to the plot lying in there. So
I think the Occam's razor explanation, my conjecture would be the mysterious woman in the hood is Mrs. Flood. Mrs. Flood is a kind of an anti-harbinger, so she's able to sort of see and warn that these sinister things are coming. She can see the TARDIS. That's what the pointing is about. She's a god-level being, so she's able to flicker in and out of existence. Or she's Susan Foreman, potentially, but she's a bit weird for Susan Foreman. And I think you would bring back Carol Ann Ford for the nostalgia. I think it would be a bit weird to just bring a separate character.
There's rumour that Carol Ann Ford's filmed something. I don't know whether that's just wishful speculation masquerading as rumour. Yeah, it doesn't feel... It didn't feel like it came from reliable sources to me.
And I think that would turn Ruby. So if it's Miss Flood dropping Mrs. Flood dropping Ruby off at the church, seeing Sutek, that would turn Ruby basically into the Chekhov's gun that solves the whole mystery. So the very existence of Ruby, that leads to a dramatic tension in the episode because the Doctor has to sacrifice Ruby to save the world or the universe from Sutek. And in some ways he does, but doesn't at the same time, which explains why Ruby is sort of half in, half out of season 2. That's my prediction.
But half the clue is that, he says the people who abandon their babies are usually in their 20s or something, or teens or 20s. So 2004, which character in Doctor Who is hanging around London and in their teens or 20s?
Well, it's Rose.
And you've got a lot of women with names relating to Red. Cherry, you've got Ruby, you've got Flynn, wasn't it? Monday Flynn.
Oh my God, are you really you're really suggesting that Billy Piper might be back? I mean, that would be interesting.
No, New Rose.
Either. It's in 2004, so New Rose wouldn't be around in 2004.
No, New Rose is only 15 in 2024, isn't she?
Yes.
So it would definitely be Old Rose.
I'm thinking Old Rose.
Yeah,
fair enough. He does lampshade the whole everybody's a shade of red thing. Yeah. So either that's a thing, or else he's lampshading it because he's realised he's accidentally done it. I think probably the latter. Mrs. Flood, then, the way we leave her in the episode, she's looking pretty sinister. You think that's a misdirect?
Yeah, I think so, because it gets to the stage where you can only have so many
villains,
sort of middle to late aged women who are looking very sinister. Because I mean, it could tie in with the woman from 73 yards. We've been told now that we won't get an explanation so many times that I think we should get an explanation at some point.
Ruby's mum was 73 yards away, wasn't she? 66.6 meters.
Away from
The
what?
episode.
63.
Ruby's mum. She was 66.6
not exactly 60.
yards away from the.
73 yards though. It's not exactly 66.6 meters, is it? Or is it?
Close on. It's close on.
Is it? I'm going to look this up now while I ask you another question. So, but I mean, I was going to bring something else up then, and it's gone. So, what were we just talking about? We were looking at. Save me from having to look it up.
I think Mrs. Flood is quite benevolent. You know, said this one character died from an ulcer. But that's when I wasn't looking.
John's cracked this thing wide open. 66 meters is 72.17 yards. So what was it? 66.6.
666, Matt.
666. Okay. 72.83 yards, which rounded up is 73 yards. So
66.7 meters, isn't it?
Meters.
Look up 66.7 meters.
66.7 meters.
Oh,
it's 72.94 yards.
Pedant. It's close enough. Russell Davies wants to play with the devil.
I think that I think that's genuinely
deliberate.
Except it might be a misdirection.
No, it feels it definitely feels deliberate, and so it feels like Russell T Davies's story about standing on Wigan Pier or wherever it was and counting how far people were away before he could see their faces. Did you hear this? He said he was standing on a pier somewhere, and
it's probably Mumbles where he lives.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, I just said Wigan Pier because of the old
Road to Wigan Pier.
Road to Wigan Pier thing. Orson Welles.
George Orwell, of course.
Yeah. But the reason I brought it up was, and now that's gone out of my head because we did the whole thing. What was the reason I brought it up? The reason I brought it up, was because 73 yards does 70. So sometimes, so this is another thing that other writers since Russell T Davies have done, is plonk an episode right in the middle of the series that is an absolute mirror for everything that's happening in the series. So if you look at Mummy on the Orient Express, for example, that feels like a metaphor for the story of series, that's 8, isn't it? Mummy on the Orient Express. That's series 8, boiled into a nutshell, is Mummy on the Orient Express. So you wonder if Russell T Davies has looked at that and stuck 73 yards in as a mirror for what's happening in this story with Ruby Sunday. So yeah, the old woman who's at 73 yards length is always Ruby Sunday, and that woman is born out of Ruby Sunday, but also Ruby Sunday is born out of that woman because they're the same person, and it kind of forms an endless loop that one person will turn into the other, but then that person will create the other person in the first place. You wonder, is that a deliberate thing, or is that just Russell T Davies riffing again? But it feels like possibly that could be the story of Ruby Sunday. We don't know that the person who drops Ruby Sunday off is the mother of Ruby Sunday, or whether it's somebody else who's taken the child on their behalf. And so on and so forth.
It's got to be the 73-yard lady, because the way that.
But the 73-yard lady is Ruby Sunday.
Yeah, but it's the way that the memory time window, you can never see her face. They're saying exactly what they said in 73 yards. Did you see her face? No, she just jumped through the frame. You can never quite see her clearly, and it's a 73-yard thing. Oh well, there we go. Unless it isn't.
I mean, what are the other, and also what else do we not know? And also, what other stories are in play at the moment?
I mean, I kind of like to see more. I kind of like to see more gods. I feel that seeing 2 gods. I'd quite like to have seen the god in Rogue. If Rogue could have been built around some sort of, that would have made it more of a theme. 2 points on the graph doesn't make a
3.
line.
You've got the
3
toy
points.
maker, haven't you? Toymaker,
you've seen the
Maestro, Sutek. So
yeah, but
and
I don't.
Lots of gods mentioned, obviously, in that one speech.
Yeah,
So that feels like it's setting things up.
I just think it needed one more god to justify it being a thing.
But I wonder if you get to the end of the next episode and Sutek's been vanquished again. But because Sutek has opened a door to the pantheon of gods to come through, that doesn't mean that we won't necessarily get other gods afterwards. So the door's been opened for sequels to Enlightenment and Snake Dance and what have you.
And I
if
think
they want to
Greatest
do
Show
it.
as well.
Oh, I think Greatest Show is the one that makes more sense in Russell T Davies's version. I think tonally, Greatest Show in the Galaxy is the one that fits best with Russell T Davies.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised to see something about the gods of Ragnarok later. But again, it seems to be, if you're mentioned in dialogue, you're not going to turn up in person, are you?
Maybe.
No, but
I mean, to me, the strategy is it's not necessarily there's one mystery. It's you could go several ways. Someone will be right, someone will be wrong. But the fun is the speculation of which is the right path.
Yeah, sure. Are there any more stories left open? I'm trying to think because I've only watched it the once, literally, and now it's sort of disappearing in my rearview mirror a bit.
Of which story they're going to use in the Memory TARDIS release of next week before the final episode. Surely Pyramids of Mars. Surely there's.
Oh, it's a clip show.
Yeah, allegedly. It just says they remember past adventures, doesn't it?
And
yeah,
surely there's no Tom Baker stories up there at the moment, so there's a gap for a Tom Baker story. They've done a lot to try and distract you from guessing which story it was, to try and avoid connecting a particular Tom Baker story with the series finale to hide Sutek.
A 60-minute edit of Pyramids of Mars exists. So a 75-minute program could be 5 minutes of Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson talking about the things that have happened to them recently, interspersed with 5 minutes of clips of episodes that we've seen this year, and then you go into 60 minutes of Pyramids of Mars, and then you've got a few minutes at the end where they wrap it up.
I mean, if they don't showcase Pyramids of Mars in this Hooniverse strand, it would be very weird to have sort of brought back this kind of fairly obscure character to the mainstream and not said, oh, by the way, this is the story he appears in, go and watch it, or repeat it on BBC Three or whatever. It would be a very strange thing to do.
It'd be a very odd thing for BBC. Is it BBC 4 or BBC 3 itself?
It's 4.
Yeah. It'd be a very odd thing for them to show if it was just a clip show like that.
Yeah.
Unless they offered it them, but we're making this anyway, you can have it, so here's something for nothing.
Yeah, I think that's probably more likely the case, because the other Tales from the TARDIS went straight onto iPlayer. And so it feels to me, but that's because there were 6 all in one go, right? So BBC 4 weren't going to show
they
all
weren't
6.
tied into anything particularly either? Or is this would tie into it?
So this is a case of let's do another one. We'll bung it on the iPlayer. It's just one, so you can bung it on the telly, and it's not taking up a massive block of evenings across the week. Do you want to show it? Yeah. Free Doctor Who on BBC 4, right? Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson in something that's never been seen elsewhere hitherto.
As well.
That's what I mean.
It's not just a re-edit of an old one.
No, it's you get, even if it's just 5 minutes of Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson, that is your current Doctor Who on BBC 4, and it will bring a few eyes. So that makes sense. And then you go into 4x3 for Pyramids of Mars. But for 60 minutes, I think that works. So, yeah.
They probably cut out all the dodgy Egyptian stuff, which doesn't work these days.
Yeah, I think that's a bit that's deliberately been cut from this. The whole God End thing cuts the colonial things out.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the edit that already exists. So unless they've messed around with the edit that already exists, it depends what would be left in there anyway.
Ben Cook's probably colorized it unnecessarily. They've probably taken all the color out and just recolorized it just for the job.
It's a TikTok edit.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was the thing with the Daleks, actually. It took a year to do, but the year it took to do wasn't because of the editing, it was because of the colouring. So it's entirely possible that even if a 60-minute edit of Pyramids of Mars already exists, they've gone off and just made their own anyway. I mean, they could have just...
I'll watch it, but I'll be angry as I watch it. And I can't help myself, but I really like Pyramids of Mars, and Pyramids of Mars is, even with the kind of the adventure game, whatever ending of it, with the City of the Excelons, even with that, I think it is a pretty well paced story.
Three and a half good episodes, half a I've just got to wrap this up.
Yeah. I wonder if they'll do it in 16:9. Did they do the Daleks in 16:9? I'm trying to think, or was that in 4:3? The Daleks in colour.
Can't remember.
I think it was in 16:9, wasn't it? I can't remember either. But it would be nice. I've seen Pyramids of Mars in 16:9, and it looks great. Most of it looks great. The sort of studio stuff on videotape doesn't look as good as the stuff out of doors, but it does. It's one of those ones, because I've talked about this before. So aesthetically, we tend to frame things side by side rather than above and below. So a lot of the stuff outdoors on Pyramids of Mars, I remember looking absolutely lovely in 16:9. So I don't know. I think it would work, but who knows? Right. Anything more, or do you want to give this one a score? I guess give it a score time. Matt, do you want to give it a score? I don't know.
I think it's 9 out of 10 because it works. I mean, it does work on a kind of a visceral fan level. I mean, it's dog shit in terms of story, but one of the things Russell T Davies can do is get away with that and produce something that I want to rewatch it. I'm with Dylan. I'd like to rewatch it just because you get the feeling that there are little hints and bits like the 66.6 yards bit, the sort of, or meters bit. So yeah, it's a 9 for me.
So I'll counterbalance that then with a 7 because I don't know if this has proper rewatch quality. I enjoyed it in the experience of watching it for the first time, but I didn't get the sense that, like Utopia, it's got that sort of accelerating thing at the end that really drags you in. I didn't really get that sense with this, so I might enjoy it more later, but for now, a 7. John?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a 9 because I think, as I said, the getting you into stories a bit abrupt.
Once again, you're making me the bad guy.
Yeah, well, it's not hard.
It's the shoe fits.
But it absolutely does what it wants to do brilliantly, which is just ramps up to that cliffhanger and closes a noose around the Doctor's neck almost. So that it really works in what it tries to do for me.
It did. I couldn't work out whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. A good thing in terms of the level of threat, or a bad thing in terms of, well, this is not what we've been told the character's like. That the Doctor was absolutely static for about the last 5 or 6 minutes. So you do feel. So I said this when we talked about Face the Raven. You do feel the Doctor should be running around trying to do something, but then again, I suppose if you want to show what the import of this thing that's happening is, to have the Doctor just standing there absolutely solid, stuck to the spot, unable to think of what to do, I guess kind of works.
But that's kind of deliberate, isn't it? Because Sutek's misdirected it to go, this is what you think it is. No, it's not. So he's already angry and frustrated, and now he's discombobulated as well.
The big question is, and I guess I am still carrying on a bit, the brilliant thing about Pyramids of Mars is not Sutek. Sutek is a brilliant thing about Pyramids of Mars, but the reason you watch Pyramids of Mars is to see the mummies wandering around the English countryside. So my question is, will we see mummies in the English countryside next week? Because if we don't see mummies in the English countryside, that's no better than bringing the Great Intelligence back and not having Yeti in the London Underground.
I think we see sand.
What more?
I think we see lots of Susan Twist in her servant of Sutek, because that's the other good thing about Pyramids of Mars was Bernard Archard and the servant of Sutek, and I think we get that next week.
Well, this was my other question that I meant to bring up. So while we're still recording, I will ask this now. So this was the thing. So at the end of the episode, you've got a lot of things that kind of are still open and need to be resolved, and a few things that are kind of resolved. Susan Twist, at the end of that episode, is properly one of the servants of Sutek. But how does she get into all those places? where she had been, across the last sort of 6 or 8 episodes. How has that happened? Is that something to do with Sutek throwing it to those places?
Sutek's
Being
in the
around the
TARDIS.
TARDIS.
Yeah.
Is that going to be explained? Is that a valid explanation? Is it?
I think it would be explained when it's explained that I assume it will be explained that Sutek has been basically either hijacking or hidden on the TARDIS. So Sutek's been either been guiding the TARDIS around, or he's been following the TARDIS around. And Susan Twist, who is a harbinger stroke servant to Sutek, has been following along at the same time, magically appearing wherever the Doctor appears. So it kind of, and then you get sort of unseen adventures with the horny one and the cyber one and various things. But I think it's been following the TARDIS.
Yeah. I guess so. Yeah. Anything more on that, John, or shall we call it?
No, I did see Unleashed, and I did laugh at Russell Davies going, no, Susan Twist wasn't her name wasn't the plan, but it was fun to do it.
I wonder if, I doubt it, because I don't suppose it could have happened this way. But then again, actually, she's a Manchester actor, so it's entirely possible that Russell T Davies had her in mind when he wrote the story. I wonder if it was the casting of her, or the potential casting of her, that made him think of the red herring for the start of the episode. Yeah, that to me sounds logical. That to me sounds like you give Russell T Davies an actor like that, and he thinks, oh yeah, if I come back to Doctor Who, I know what I'm going to do. And there you go. That's what we got. Right, we'll be back next week then to talk all about Empire of Death, which isn't going to turn out to be damaged goods, is it?
No.
So you were right with Sutek.
Oh no, that wasn't me. I was Gods of Ragnarok, man. I got it wrong.
Okay.
Until we're back to talk Empire of Death, I was JR.
I was John, as played by Susan Twist.
And I was Matt.
And we will speak again soon.